Far to the north, the world begins to harden under ice. Great sheets of frozen water spread across the continents, locking seas, grinding mountains, and pushing winds into endless storms. The Pleistocene is at its height, and the Arctic lies under a mantle of cold unlike anything most humans have known. Yet here, on the edge of these frozen domains, small groups of modern humans arrive. They step into landscapes where snow lingers year-round, and where summer is short, pale, and cool. Their presence marks one of the boldest thresholds in the history of migration. At first glance, the north appears barren. Ice walls gleam on the horizon, reflecting weak sunlight back into the sky. Rivers run heavy with meltwater in the warmer months, then vanish under thick ice when the seasons turn. The land is treeless in many places, an open tundra where only hardy shrubs, moss, and grasses cling to the soil. Yet this apparent emptiness conceals abundance. Herds of mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, reindeer, and steppe bison graze across wide plains of frost-kissed grass. Predators move in silence. Cave lions, wolves, and scimitar-toothed cats, all watching the herds, and sometimes watching humans as well. The people who reach these margins are not entirely unprepared. By the time they approach the Arctic, they have already crossed deserts, forests, and mountains. They have fashioned shelters from wood, stone, and hide. They know how to sew skins into clothing and how to keep fire alive through rain and wind, yet nothing has trained them for the length of the northern winter. In this world, darkness itself becomes a force. For months, the sun hovers low or vanishes altogether. The cold deepens and the ground hardens to stone. Every step, every breath requires new strategies. Archaeological traces suggest the first sustained presence of modern humans in high latitudes around 40,000 years ago. Sites in Siberia reveal stone blades, carved bone, and ornaments carried across great distances. One remarkable detail comes from a mammoth ivory bead found hundreds of kilometers away from its likely source. Such an object shows that these people moved widely or traded across vast ranges, even in these severe lands. To carry beauty into such hardship is telling. Survival was not their only concern. Symbolism, identity, and connection traveled with them. Still, questions remain unresolved. Did humans press northward intentionally, drawn by the herds and open plains, or were they pushed gradually, following rivers and valleys until they found themselves under Arctic skies? Scholars continue to debate whether this movement was a deliberate colonization of the north or a slow drift in pursuit of food. No single answer exists. What is clear is that once they crossed into these regions, they left behind unmistakable signs of adaptation. Planetary changes frame their journey. The Ice Age locks immense quantities of water into glaciers, lowering sea levels worldwide. Coastlines stretch outward, exposing land bridges that join islands to continents. Winds sweep dust across Eurasia, depositing loess soils that feed the grasses of the mammoth steppe. The Earth itself seems tilted toward the north, channeling resources and hazards into the paths of those who wander there. Against this backdrop, the human presence is fragile, a small thread woven into immense planetary cycles. Imagine a group of travelers reaching the northern edge of a Siberian river valley. The river, swollen with glacial melt, winds across a plain where mammoths graze in the distance. The travelers carry stone-tipped spears, bags of hide, and bundles of fuel. They move cautiously, for the land is unfamiliar. When night falls and they set a fire against the wind, using bones and dried grasses as fuel. Around them, the dark is total. Above, stars blaze with unusual clarity in the thin, cold air. The Arctic reveals both danger and vastness in every glance. One lesser-known clue to their endurance lies in the bones of hares and foxes found at early campsites. These smaller animals, often overlooked in favor of mammoth or bison, may have provided critical food and fur. The remains suggest that people did not depend solely on the great herds, but drew from every available source. A patchwork of strategies, large hunts, small traps, foraging for roots under snow, formed the base of survival. Each choice mattered in an environment where one failed season could erase a group entirely. Uncertainty surrounds the pace of their adaptation. Did humans develop new tools only after reaching these latitudes? Or did knowledge flow between different groups across Eurasia? Some evidence hints at cultural exchanges with Neanderthals, who had long occupied cold regions. Techniques for preparing hides, shaping stone points, or even organizing shelter may have been shared or reinvented multiple times. The North becomes a meeting ground not only between human and animal, but between different kinds of humanity. Step by step, groups begin to treat the Arctic margin not as a barrier but as a habitat. They place camps along rivers that cut through tundra, where fish and game concentrate. They follow seasonal cycles. Summer brings abundance. Winter requires storage and caution. With time, they learn to read the signs of ice and snow, the thickness of a frozen river, the warning cracks underfoot, the way the wind piles drifts along certain slopes. Knowledge accumulates, passed quietly from one generation to the next, etched into memory rather than carved into stone. The presence of humans here is almost invisible compared to the grandeur of the glaciers. Ice sheets, hundreds of meters thick, advance and retreat on timescales beyond human life. Mountains grind under their weight, valleys deepen, and rivers shift course entirely. Against this immensity, a single campfire is a fragile point of warmth. Yet that fire is enough. It marks persistence. It declares that humans, however small in number, can exist at the boundary of the frozen earth. Some mysteries persist even in the evidence. Stone tools scattered in northern sites sometimes appear abruptly, with no clear trail linking them to southern traditions. Did entire groups move quickly into these areas, or did small bands make exploratory forays that left fleeting traces without written records? Certainty remains out of reach. What remains are fragments, a sharpened blade, a bead of ivory, a burned patch of bone. From such pieces, the story of Arctic arrival must be drawn. The journey north also reshapes human perception of time. In the Arctic, seasons swing with dramatic force. Months of light give way to months of darkness. Migratory birds vanish in autumn, returning in sudden floods during spring. To live here requires a new sense of rhythm, guided by the movements of animals and the tilt of the sun. Humans adapt not only in body and tool, but in thought, orienting their lives around cycles unlike those of the temperate world. Far away, glaciers continue to thicken and oceans continue to shrink. The planetary stage is still changing, but on its edge, humans are learning. Their camps lie at the threshold of cold and endurance. Each successful hunt, each fire that endures through the night, secures another step into this unforgiving land. What began as exploration is becoming habitation. The edge of the ice is no longer only a frontier, it is becoming a human world. The Arctic frontier is not entered alone. Humans step into it alongside the great animals of the Ice Age, and none are more important than the mammoth. These immense creatures, with curved tusks and thick woolly coats, roam the steppe in herds that shape the rhythm of the land. Where they travel, the ground is trampled flat. Paths are worn through the tundra, and the snow is broken to reveal grasses beneath. To follow the mammoths is to follow survival itself. The mammoth provides food, hide, bone, and direction. A single animal can feed a group for weeks, its meat preserved in frozen ground or dried in icy air. Its hide becomes clothing and shelter, stitched with bone needles into garments that guard against cutting winds. Tusks, heavy and curved, are carved into tools, ornaments, and even frameworks for houses where wood is scarce. To walk in the tracks of these herds is to gain not only sustenance but also the guidance of creatures that know the terrain better than any human. Mammoths sense the routes through valleys, across rivers, and toward pastures where grasses still grow despite the cold. The evidence of this bond between human and mammoth is preserved in scattered sites. In Siberia, piles of mammoth bones mark ancient camps, some arranged deliberately, perhaps as walls or windbreaks. In places along the Dnieper and Don rivers, circular structures made from mammoth bones have been uncovered. These shelters, built tens of thousands of years ago, reveal a remarkable adaptation, using the very frame of the animal to withstand Arctic storms. Here, human ingenuity rests on the body of the mammoth itself. Yet, survival through mammoths was not straightforward. To bring down such a massive creature required cooperation, skill, and no small measure of risk. Spears tipped with stone or bone had to strike vulnerable spots, often at close range. Some hunts may have relied on traps or natural features, guiding animals into swamps, river ice, or steep terrain where they became vulnerable. Others may have depended on opportunism, taking advantage of the weak, the sick, or the young left behind. The danger was immense. One charge from a mammoth could crush hunters or scatter groups into the snow. Archaeological traces hint at the strategies used. Long spear points, known as lithic blades, appear in regions where mammoths were abundant. Burned bone fragments suggest that marrow and fat were carefully extracted, maximizing nutrition from each kill. Cut marks on mammoth bones show precise butchery, systematic removal of meat, and transport of selected pieces back to camp. From these details, the picture emerges of communities that planned carefully, used every part of the animal, and sustained themselves through winters with mammoth stores. One lesser-known aspect of this relationship lies in the symbolic use of mammoth ivory. Beyond tools and structures, ivory was carved into figurines and ornaments. Small sculptures of animals and abstract shapes have been found in sites far from the living mammoths. These objects may have carried meaning beyond practical survival, identity, memory, or connection to the creatures that shaped human existence. To carve the image of a mammoth into ivory was, in a sense, to carry the animal's spirit into daily life. Still, mysteries remain. Scholars debate how heavily humans depended on mammoths compared to other prey. Were they central to survival, or occasional prizes supplementing a varied diet of reindeer, horse, bison, fish, and small game? Some argue that reliance on mammoths may have been overstated, pointing to the difficulty and danger of such hunts. Others suggest that the abundance of bones in certain camps reflects a specialized way of life centered on these giants. The truth may lie between. Humans were flexible, opportunistic, but deeply attuned to the paths of mammoths whenever possible. The planetary scale of the Ice Age amplifies this story. As glaciers lock water into ice, global sea levels drop by more than 100 meters. Vast plains emerge, covered in grasses that stretch from Western Europe to eastern Beringia. This steppe tundra biome, sometimes called the mammoth steppe, is the largest continuous ecosystem of its time. Its richness supports immense herds, and those herds, in turn, guide human expansion. To follow mammoths is to step into a continental highway leading from the Black Sea to the Arctic Circle and beyond. Step by step, humans adapt their movements to these rhythms. In summer, they shadow the herds northward, taking advantage of grazing pastures that open with the melt. In winter, they retreat to sheltered valleys, where mammoths also seek refuge. Camps move in cycles, tethered not to fixed settlements, but to the pulse of animal migration. This pattern leaves a distinctive signature in the archaeological record: campsites used seasonally, tools cached for return, and bones deposited in layers that echo repeated visits. One striking discovery along the Yana River in Siberia reveals mammoth bones alongside human artifacts dating to more than 30,000 years ago. The site lies far north of the Arctic Circle, showing that humans not only ventured into these realms, but sustained themselves there with the aid of mammoth hunting. Among the finds are spears carved from ivory, delicate beads, and evidence of repeated occupation. This is not a fleeting camp, it is the trace of a community anchored by the presence of the great herds. The mammoth also influences human thought in subtler ways. To live in such proximity to these immense animals must have shaped perceptions of scale and endurance. The herds move slowly but steadily, across distances longer than many human lifetimes. To follow them is to inhabit a world measured not in villages or valleys, but in entire continents. The idea of range, of distance, of possibility expands with each step in their tracks. But the story is not without uncertainty. Some mammoth sites reveal bones arranged in puzzling patterns. Were these deliberate constructions, ritual deposits, or simply the result of natural processes? Without written testimony, interpretation remains open. What endures is the fact that mammoths and humans left marks together, their paths intertwined across the frozen plains. Each tusk, each hearth, each cut mark on a bone speaks of a dialogue between species, one built on necessity, ingenuity, and risk. The dependence on mammoths also highlights the fragility of Arctic life. If herds shifted routes or declined in number, humans had to adjust quickly. A single failed migration could leave camps without food or raw materials. In such a precarious environment, flexibility was key. People turned to fishing when rivers ran thick with salmon, to reindeer when herds passed through valleys, to hares and foxes when larger prey eluded them. The mammoth was central, but it was part of a wider web of survival strategies, all tested against the unforgiving cold. Over thousands of years, the bond between humans and mammoths would endure until climates shifted and populations dwindled. But in this early chapter, as humans pressed northward, the mammoth was guide and sustainer. To follow them was to step into the heart of the Ice Age world, to find a path through landscapes that seemed uninhabitable, and to weave human life into the rhythm of giants. Stretching from the coasts of Western Europe all the way across Siberia and into the land bridge of Beringia lies a vast, continuous ecosystem. It is known today as the Mammoth Steppe. During the height of the Ice Age, this was the largest biome on Earth, covering millions of square kilometers. It was neither forest nor desert, neither simple tundra nor open plain. It was a unique mix, cold, dry, and rich in grasses. Here, humans found both hardship and opportunity. A land that had once resisted and sustained them. The steppe is shaped by the climate of the Pleistocene. Glaciers dominate the higher latitudes, pressing outward like frozen seas. Their weight locks up immense quantities of water, lowering global sea levels by more than 100 meters. With oceans withdrawn, new lands emerge, and winds sweep across open ground carrying dust and loess. This wind-blown soil feeds the growth of hardy grasses, sedges, and herbs. Though trees are scarce, the land is not barren. It pulses with life, sustained by plants that can endure long winters and short, intense summers. The scale of the Mammoth Steppe is difficult to imagine. In its fullest reach, it spans from the Iberian Peninsula to the shores of Alaska. A journey across it would stretch farther than the distance between Paris and Seoul. Vast herds move over these plains, their hooves thundering against the frozen ground. Mammoths, reindeer, bison, horses, and woolly rhinoceros graze the grasses, keeping the land open and preventing shrubs from spreading. Predators follow: lions, hyenas, wolves, and bears. The web of life is immense, resilient, and balanced in a way rarely seen since. For humans entering this world, the steppe offers a paradox. On the one hand, it is exposed, bitterly cold, with little shelter from wind or snow. On the other, it is full of game. Nowhere else on Earth did such large herds roam in such numbers. For a small group with the right skills, it could provide meat, hides, and bone in abundance. But success was never guaranteed. To travel this landscape required constant movement, patience, and the ability to read both animals and seasons. Archaeological sites reveal the traces of these movements. Along river valleys, campsites hold layers of stone flakes, butchered bones, and hearths. Some sites were used again and again as groups followed the herds along predictable routes. The remains show not just survival but continuity, a rhythm of life linked to the cycles of the steppe. Each return to a familiar place carried memory, knowledge, and the marks of previous generations. One lesser-known detail comes from pollen preserved in ancient soils. Analysis shows that the Mammoth Steppe was far richer in plant diversity than the modern tundra. More than 100 species of grasses and herbs grew together, forming carpets of nutrition for grazing animals. This explains how such immense herds could be sustained. To human eyes, the land may have looked sparse, but in truth it was a mosaic of edible plants, invisible at first glance, revealed only by careful study thousands of years later. Still, many mysteries remain. Scholars debate exactly why this biome disappeared so completely when the Ice Age ended. Was it the warming climate, the loss of grazing animals, or a combination of both? Some argue that human, by hunting mammoths and other megafauna, disrupted the balance, allowing shrubs and trees to spread where once grass had dominated. Others emphasize that even without human presence, rising temperatures would have reshaped the land. The truth likely lies in the interplay of many forces: climate, animals, and people together transforming a world. Planetary processes are visible in every aspect of the steppe. As the Earth tilts on its axis, seasons swing with exaggerated intensity. Winters are long, cold, and dark, while summers bring nearly continuous light that fuels rapid plant growth. Winds driven by continental ice sheets sweep across the plains, sculpting dunes and depositing dust. The biome is tied directly to global cycles, to ice sheets expanding and retreating, to oceans rising and falling, to carbon locked and released in permafrost. To live here is to be bound into the heartbeat of the planet itself. Humans on the mammoth steppe rely on more than large game. Evidence shows the importance of fish drawn from rivers teeming with salmon during spawning runs. Birds provide eggs and meat in summer. Small animals, hares, foxes, ground squirrels, add variety to the diet and furnish valuable furs. Seeds and roots, though less visible, may also have been gathered when available. Flexibility is the key, weaving together many resources in an environment where one failed source could spell disaster. Shelter remains a pressing need. With little wood for building, groups turn to bones and hides. Mammoth bones form the frames of huts, covered with skins and insulated with grass. Hearths burn with bone and dried dung when wood cannot be found. Each shelter becomes a fragile island of warmth on an open plain. The arrangement of bones in some sites suggests careful planning, even architecture, revealing a sophistication often underestimated in these early humans. The scale of human presence is tiny compared to the vastness of the steppe. A single camp might hold only a few dozen individuals, yet the landscape around them stretches beyond sight, filled with herds and predators. This contrast defines life here. Small bands of people navigating a world dominated by immense forces. Each decision, to move, to hunt, to rest, carries weight against the backdrop of endless grass and sky. One enduring mystery lies in the routes humans chose across this expanse. Did they prefer river valleys, which offered water, fish, and predictable paths? Or did they range widely across open plain, tracking herds directly? The archaeological record shows traces of both. Some camps cluster near major rivers like the Lena and the Yenisei. Others appear in more open ground, suggesting diverse strategies. Without clear maps from the time, the precise patterns remain hidden, glimpsed only through scattered tools and bones. Over time, the mammoth steppe shaped not only human survival, but human imagination. The presence of giants, the mammoth, the rhinoceros, the bison, must have impressed itself on thought and memory. To live among such creatures required both respect and adaptation. Perhaps it also inspired stories, images, and symbols carved into bone and ivory. Though we cannot know the exact meanings, the artifacts suggest that the steppe was not merely a backdrop, but a world deeply inscribed into human identity. As the Ice Age advanced, this biome remained resilient, holding its ground against cold and wind. Yet it was not eternal. Warming would eventually close it, shrinking its range, breaking its continuity, and scattering its inhabitants. For the humans who first entered, however, it was the stage on which they proved their ability to endure. The mammoth steppe, vast and unforgiving, became their teacher and their path forward. In the cold landscapes of the north, survival depends not only on strength and persistence, but on tools. The Arctic frontier tests every aspect of human ingenuity. The chill is relentless, the winds cut through skin, and the days of darkness stretch longer than many have ever known. To meet these challenges, early humans craft a new set of technologies: stone, bone, ivory, and hide shaped into forms that allow them to endure. These innovations are the quiet foundations of Arctic life. Stone remains at the heart of toolmaking. Long blades, struck carefully from prepared cores, provide sharp edges for cutting meat and scraping hides. Points, finely retouched, are set onto wooden shafts to form spears that can pierce thick fur and heavy muscle. Flakes serve as versatile knives, used to process everything from animal sinew to fish. Archaeologists uncover such tools across Siberia, their edges still sharp after tens of thousands of years. Each fragment testifies to the skill required not only to make but to maintain them. In a world where resources are scarce, nothing can be wasted. Broken blades are reshaped, dulled edges reworked, fragments turned into scrapers or drills. Yet, stone alone is not enough. The cold demands clothing, and clothing demands needles. Among the most important discoveries in Arctic sites are bone and ivory needles, complete with drilled eyes for thread. These are among the earliest needles known in the world. With them, humans sew hides into tailored garments, fitted to cover wrists, ankles, and faces, sealing in warmth. Loose wraps are no longer sufficient. Only stitched clothing can block wind and trap heat effectively. The invention of such sewing tools represents a turning point, allowing humans to expand into climates far colder than those of their evolutionary origins. Clothing itself is drawn from the animals of the steppe. Reindeer and hare provide soft, insulating fur. Mammoth hide, though thick and heavy, can be used for outer layers or shelters. Fox pelts, with their dense winter coats, become valuable for trimming hoods and gloves. Each stitch embodies deep knowledge: how to cut skins without tearing, how to preserve hides against rot, how to combine furs for maximum warmth. These skills cannot be improvised overnight. They are honed through long practice and passed from one generation to the next. Without them, human life in the Arctic would falter. Another vital innovation comes in the form of shelters. Wood is scarce in many northern regions, forcing creative solutions. Mammoth bones, arranged in circular patterns, form the frames of dwellings. Large tusks are arched into ribs, while skulls and limb bones form walls. Over these frames, hides are stretched, secured with stakes of bone or antler, and weighted with stones. Inside, hearths burn steadily, fed with bones and dried grasses when firewood is absent. Archaeological sites in Ukraine and Russia reveal entire villages of such structures, some dating back more than 20,000 years. They stand as enduring evidence of how humans reshaped the very remains of the animals they depended on into homes. Fire technology itself evolves under these conditions. Carrying flame becomes essential when cold can kill within hours. People learn to preserve embers, protecting them in containers of bark or bone, so a new fire can be started quickly. They experiment with fuels, dung from grazing animals, marrow-rich bones, and even peat in some regions. Sparks are struck from stone against pyrite, their glow caught on dry moss or fungus. Each fire represents survival, but also continuity, linking night to day, camp to camp. The mastery of fire in the north is not a single act, but a constant practice. One lesser-known detail emerges from microscopic analysis of stone tools: residues of fish scales, plant fibers, and even traces of ochre show that technology extended beyond hunting large mammals. Nets, traps, and fishing gear may have been fashioned from organic materials that rarely survive in the record. Such evidence suggests a broad toolkit, much richer than the stone and bone alone might reveal. Humans adapted not by relying on one resource, but by developing a web of technologies to capture every opportunity the landscape offered. Still, mysteries remain. Scholars debate how quickly these innovations appeared. Did tailored clothing and bone shelters emerge as direct responses to Arctic entry, or were they developed earlier and carried north? Some evidence points to sewing needles in sites well south of the Arctic, hinting at a gradual spread of technology. Others suggest that cold climates forced independent invention. The truth may involve both, skills evolving in many regions, refined and recombined as groups met new challenges. The absence of organic materials, cloth, wood, fiber, leaves gaps that can never be fully closed. At the planetary scale, these technologies connect human life to cycles of climate and ice. As glaciers expand, temperatures drop, and steppe landscapes spread, humans adjust their toolkits in response, shaping stone and bone to match the needs of an altered world. When climate warms, forests advance as new challenges arise. The story of tools is thus inseparable from the story of Earth itself, each shift in temperature mirrored by shifts in human craft. Consider the scale of effort behind a single garment. To clothe one person fully requires multiple hides, carefully scraped, softened, and sewn. Thread must be spun from sinew, needles carved from bone, and designs tested for fit and function. For a group of 20, the labor multiplies enormously. This investment shows how critical technology is. Without such preparation, exposure would overwhelm even the strongest individuals. Tools, in this sense, are not luxuries, but the very means of life. Archaeological finds also reveal moments of artistry within utility. Needles are sometimes polished smooth, their surfaces gleaming from use. Ivory ornaments, carved alongside practical items, suggest that beauty was not abandoned even in harsh conditions. Decoration on spear points or beads strung from animal teeth remind us that technology served not only survival but expression. To carry a decorated tool is to carry identity, memory, perhaps even a sense of belonging in a vast, cold world. The fragility of this record leaves many questions unresolved. Were there early experiments with snowshoes, sleds, or skis, devices hinted at by later Arctic cultures? Did humans develop methods of food storage beyond freezing, perhaps using pits or shelters lined with hide? The evidence is incomplete, but the possibilities remind us of the depth of ingenuity required. Every adaptation reflects not just necessity, but imagination, seeing in bone, hide, and stone the potential for something new. Over time, these tools accumulate into a system of survival. Spears, needles, shelters, fires, ornaments, each plays a role, each interacts with the others. Together, they make life possible where otherwise it would fail. This system allows humans not only to enter the Arctic, but to remain, to raise children, to pass knowledge forward. It is a quiet triumph, built not on sudden breakthroughs but on countless small refinements. Step by step, technology transforms the relationship between humans and the cold. The Arctic is no longer only a place of danger, but a domain where life can be sustained. The tools forged here will echo far into the future, shaping migrations, settlements, and cultures yet to come. In the silence of the Ice Age night, as wind howls over the steppe a single human sits sewing by firelight. Each stitch binds hide to hide, and each stitch binds humanity to survival at the edge of the frozen earth. Night in the Arctic arrives differently than in temperate lands. Darkness stretches for weeks, sometimes months, swallowing the horizon in long twilight or near total absence of the sun. In such a world, fire becomes not only useful, but essential. The first humans to establish themselves in the high latitudes carry with them a deep knowledge of flame, refined over hundreds of thousands of years. Yet here, in the open tundra and steppe, fire takes on new roles. It becomes light in endless night, warmth against unyielding cold, and a fragile shield against predators that prowl the snow. The practical challenge begins with fuel. In the Arctic, wood is scarce. Trees grow stunted or vanish entirely as tundra stretches across the land. Groups must improvise, gathering what is available. Dried grasses, shrubs, and mosses are collected in bundles. Dung from grazing animals is shaped into patties that dry in the wind, ready to burn. Most critically, bones rich in fat and marrow are fed into flames. Archaeological sites reveal layers of calcined bone, evidence that fires here were sustained not by forests but by the remains of animals themselves. To burn bone is to transform death into light. The hearth becomes the center of each camp. Stones or mammoth bones are arranged in circles, containing the embers and protecting them from wind. Ash builds up, creating basins where coals can survive through the night. In some sites, evidence suggests that embers were carefully preserved and carried, ensuring that fire was never truly extinguished. The continuity of flame is continuity of life. Losing fire in the Arctic could mean death. Maintaining it was a daily priority. One lesser-known detail lies in the use of fungi as tinder. Certain shelf fungi, growing on birch or fallen wood far to the south, can smolder for hours when ignited. Hunters may have carried these with them, allowing embers to be transported over long journeys. Such techniques, though invisible in most archaeological layers, are hinted at by ethnographic parallels and microscopic traces of charred organic matter. They show the ingenuity required to adapt old knowledge to new, harsher circumstances. Still, mysteries remain. Did humans master firelighting with flint and pyrite consistently by the time they reached the Arctic? Or did they rely more heavily on preserving embers? Some argue that true ignition with sparks became widespread only later, while others see earlier evidence in scorched stones and fire-cracked rocks. The exact timing is debated, leaving uncertainty about how often fire was struck anew versus carried carefully from place to place. What is certain is that without fire, the Arctic could not be endured. At a planetary scale, the meaning of fire expands. During the Ice Age, vast stores of carbon are locked in permafrost. The steppe remains open and dry, shaped by the absence of trees. Fire in this environment is rarely a great forest blaze. Instead, it is small, human-controlled, concentrated in hearths. Each flame is a counterpoint to the glaciers that dominate the horizon. The glow of a hearth is a pocket of warmth within a frozen system, a reminder that even in an era of planetary cold, human beings can generate their own microclimate of heat. The social role of fire deepens as well. Around the hearth, people gather, cook, and share. Meat from a mammoth haunch is roasted, marrow boiled into broth, fish smoked for storage. The fire provides light, by which tools are repaired, hides scraped, and needles threaded. In its glow, knowledge is passed on. The teaching of skills, the telling of migrations, the memory of ancestors. Though no words survive from those nights, the fire's role as a hub of communication is clear from its central place in camps. To imagine an Arctic camp without a hearth is to imagine silence, darkness, and peril. Archaeological traces reinforce this. In the Yana River sites, hearths appear repeatedly across different layers of occupation. They mark not only individual fires, but generations of return. In mammoth bone dwellings along the Dnieper, central hearths stand at the core of circular structures, their ash preserved for millennia. Charcoal fragments reveal what little wood was used, often birch or willow carried from distant stands. The consistency of these finds shows that wherever humans went, fire followed, and wherever fire burned, life could take root. Fire also interacts with the wider ecosystem. The use of dung and bone as fuel links human survival to the cycles of grazing herds. Each mammoth or reindeer not only provides meat and hide, but, in death, provides fuel for warmth and cooking. In this sense, fire is woven into the web of life, sustained by animals that themselves graze on the grasses of the steppe. The energy of the sun, captured in plants, transferred to animals, finally burns in human hearths. The cycle is complete, binding cosmic processes to nightly survival. The fragility of fire in the Arctic cannot be overstated. A sudden gust could scatter sparks into snow, extinguishing a carefully built blaze. Wet tinder could refuse to catch in freezing rain. Embers could die if not tended through the night. To guard the hearth was as important as to guard the camp itself. Each person knew the risks of neglect. To wake in darkness without heat was to confront death directly. The vigilance with which fires were maintained speaks to their centrality in human thought and routine. Over time, fire became not only a practical tool but a symbol of endurance. Ivory carvings and ochre-stained stones found near hearths hint at moments of ritual or reflection. The glow of flames against carved objects may have held meaning, perhaps reinforcing bonds within the group or between the living and the dead. While speculation must be cautious, the repeated placement of ornaments near hearths suggests that fire was more than utility. It was also presence, something to gather meaning around, as well as warmth. One unresolved question concerns the role of fire in hunting strategies. Some scholars suggest that torches or controlled flames may have been used to drive animals, to frighten herds, or to light the way across dark tundra. Others see little evidence for such uses in early Arctic contexts. The idea remains possible but unproven, another gap in the record where imagination meets silence. Whether or not flames lit the hunt, they certainly lit the camp, and that was enough to shape the destiny of those who lived here. At the edge of the Ice Age night, the sight of a hearth must have been profound. In a landscape dominated by cold, wind, and snow, the glow of fire marked humanity itself. It was a beacon of continuity, the difference between survival and loss. Each camp that carried flame into the Arctic laid claim to a space otherwise hostile. In doing so, they extended not only their range, but their identity. Fire was no longer simply a tool. It was the condition that allowed humans to belong in the far north. Step by step, the first Arctic fires carved small islands of warmth into a frozen continent. Each ember, each spark, each carefully tended flame marked a defiance of cold and darkness. Together, they formed a chain of survival that reached across thousands of years. The Arctic, vast and forbidding, was illuminated not by the sun in winter, but by human fire, steady and enduring, glowing softly against the endless ice. The Ice Age world is a landscape of rivers, fed by glaciers. They stretch for hundreds of kilometers across Eurasia, winding through tundra, cutting channels through loess plains, and carrying meltwater toward distant seas. For the humans who push northward, these rivers are both lifelines and barriers. They provide fish, fresh water, and pathways through otherwise trackless steppe. Yet they also block movement, surge with floods, and freeze into walls of ice. To survive in the Arctic frontier, humans must learn not only how to follow rivers, but how to cross them when conditions allow or demand. In summer, rivers swell, meltwater pours from ice sheets, filling valleys, flooding lowlands, and shifting channels unpredictably. Crossing in these months is dangerous. Swift currents sweep away travelers, and cold water chills the body within minutes. Archaeological traces suggest that groups chose their crossing points carefully, using shallows or braided sections where many small channels spread across gravel bars. They may have built simple rafts from hides stretched over frames of bone or driftwood. Though few traces of such craft remain, the logic of their necessity is clear. Without crossing, migration stalls, and resources remain unreachable. Winter changes everything. Temperatures fall, and rivers lock in ice. Wide channels become frozen bridges, bearing the weight of mammoths, bison, and humans alike. For months, the great rivers that once divided the land become solid pathways, opening routes across vast distances. Hunters can follow herds across ice, dragging sledges of meat and hides behind them. Families can move entire camps with relative ease. Yet even this gift carries danger. Ice can be deceptive, its strength varying with depth, current, and temperature. A single misstep on thin ice risks plunging into freezing water, where survival is unlikely. Archaeological sites along the Lena Dob and Yenisei rivers show evidence of repeated human use during the Ice Age. Camps cluster along banks, sometimes reoccupied for centuries. Stone tools, hearths, and butchered bones suggest that these rivers were not merely obstacles but focal points of life. They offered fish runs during summer, migration corridors for animals, and frozen pathways in winter. To understand the spread of humans into the Arctic, one must follow these rivers. They are the arteries of the steppe, binding the landscape into a network of movement. One lesser-known detail lies in the bones of fish discovered at northern sites. Pike, salmon, and sturgeon appear in deposits tens of thousands of years old. Their presence indicates that fishing, though difficult in icy conditions, was a crucial supplement to diets. Nets woven from plant fibers or sinew may have been used. Though they rarely survive in the record, ice holes may have been cut to access fish beneath frozen rivers. These techniques require patience and knowledge, suggesting that humans did not simply pass rivers but lived with them, drawing sustenance from their depths. Mysteries remain about the exact methods of crossing during different seasons. Did humans construct temporary bridges from bones and hides to stabilize thin ice? Did they guide herds into rivers deliberately, creating opportunities for hunting in the chaos? Some archaeologists see patterns of broken bones and scattered remains that hint at animals falling through ice, exploited by waiting hunters. Others caution that such interpretations may overreach. The record is fragmentary. leaving open the question of how often rivers served as hunting grounds versus travel routes. At the planetary scale, rivers mirror the pulse of ice sheets. As glaciers advance, they divert channels, carve new valleys, and sometimes dam entire basins. When ice retreats, floods release with catastrophic force, reshaping landscapes in days. Humans navigating this world must adjust constantly. A route used one generation may vanish the next, blocked by ice or transformed by flood. To cross frozen rivers is not only a technical skill but a strategy of adaptation to a world in constant motion, sculpted by climate on a continental scale. The scale of distance is striking. The Yana River alone stretches more than 4,000 kilometers from its headwaters to the Arctic Ocean. For humans moving along its valley, this is not a single journey, but a corridor spanning generations. Camps along its banks may be separated by hundreds of kilometers, yet all linked by the same waterway. In this way, rivers serve as memory lines, connecting groups across space and time. Each crossing, each camp, is part of a larger story unfolding along currents of ice and melt. The material culture of these river travelers reflects the challenges they faced. Heavy scrapers and blades suggest processing of hides made wet by river crossings. Burned bone and charcoal near riverbanks show that fires were built quickly, perhaps to dry soaked garments or preserve meat at camp. Needles from these sites indicate that waterproof clothing, sewn hides, carefully treated with fat or marrow, was essential. Without such garments, exposure to water and wind could be fatal. Tools and clothing alike reveal that rivers were not incidental obstacles, but central realities shaping daily life. One unresolved question concerns the role of sledges or dragged loads across ice. Later, Arctic cultures used sleds pulled by dogs or reindeer, but the origins of such practices are uncertain. Some Ice Age sites contain grooves or wear on bones that might suggest dragging. Were hides stretched into crude sledges for transporting meat, firewood, or children across frozen rivers? Or did people carry burdens directly on their backs and relying on endurance rather than devices? The evidence is thin, leaving this aspect of adaptation open to debate. Yet what is clear is that frozen rivers altered the pace of human migration. In winter, groups could cross easily, traveling far along icebound highways. In spring thaw, those same routes became impassable, forcing long detours. Seasonal rhythms thus structured movement, tying human schedules to the freeze and melt of water. This rhythm persists in the archaeological record, visible in the seasonal use of camps and in the layers of animal remains reflecting timed hunts. Humans became attuned to rivers not as fixed features but as shifting systems alive with seasonal change. The presence of rivers also connects humans to other species. Mammoths and bison cross rivers in search of pastures, carving trails through snow and ice. Wolves shadow them, exploiting weakness at crossings. Birds migrate along river valleys, using them as aerial highways across continents. Humans enter this network as one participant among many, learning from the tracks of animals, the timing of fish runs, the behavior of ice. In following rivers, they follow the larger rhythms of life itself. Imagine a band of humans approaching a wide Siberian river in late winter. The ice gleams in pale light, thick in some places, thin in others. They test it with spears, listening for cracks. Carefully, they step across, carrying children, dragging hides filled with dried meat. In the silence, the ice groans. Ahead, mammoths move steadily, confident on their massive feet. Behind, a fire burns low, abandoned until the group establishes camp on the far bank. Each step across the frozen water is a step deeper into the Arctic frontier. Over time, these crossings accumulate into migration. Each river crossed expands the known world, linking one valley to the next. The Arctic is not a land without paths, it is a land where paths shift with the seasons, where rivers themselves become roads in winter and obstacles in summer. To master these crossings is to unlock the geography of the North. It is to turn barriers into bridges, to transform uncertainty into opportunity, and to bind human life more deeply into the cycles of ice and water. Step by step, humans learn this lesson. They do not conquer the rivers, they adapt to them, reading their signs, respecting their dangers, and using their gifts. The frozen waters carry them forward, allowing migration to continue where otherwise it would stop. In the glow of distant hearths, across valleys shaped by melt and freeze, the story of the first Arctic crossings unfolds. Quiet, fragile, and enduring. At the northern edges of Eurasia, long before modern humans became the only species of their kind, other humans were already established. These were the Neanderthals, stocky, strong, and well adapted to cold climates. They had lived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Their bones and tools are scattered across caves, river valleys, and steppe edges. When modern humans pressed northward, their paths eventually converged. The encounters that followed shaped the story of both groups. Neanderthals were not strangers to cold. Their bodies carried adaptations suited for conserving heat, wide torsos, shorter limbs, and powerful muscles. Archaeological finds show that they hunted large animals, tanned hides, and built shelters of wood and stone. In some caves, evidence of fire use, hearths, and even cooking has been preserved. They thrived in the glacial landscapes of Europe, occupying territories that stretched from Spain to Siberia. By the time modern humans arrived in these same regions, Neanderthals had endured for thousands of generations. The first contacts likely occurred along ecological borders, where steppe met forest, or where rivers connected different zones. Here, signs of both species appear in close proximity. At some sites, layers of Neanderthal occupation are followed immediately by those of modern humans, suggesting swift replacement or close succession. At others, the evidence is intermixed, hinting at possible coexistence. The archaeological record, however, is fragmentary. No site yet provides a clear snapshot of direct interaction. Instead, we are left with overlapping traces, silent witnesses to a meeting of different human worlds. One lesser-known detail emerges from microscopic study of stone tools. Some artifacts appear to combine techniques associated with both groups. A blade may be struck in a style typical of modern humans, but retouched in a manner linked to Neanderthals. Such hybrids suggest either exchange of knowledge or observation of each other's methods. Technology does not exist in isolation, it travels with people. And when people meet, ideas can pass between them. Whether through cooperation, imitation, or rivalry, encounters shaped the tools carried forward. Still, mysteries abound. Were these meetings mostly hostile, marked by competition for game and shelter? Or did they include periods of peaceful exchange, even intermarriage? Genetic evidence has answered part of the question. DNA extracted from living people around the world reveals that all non-African populations carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry. This means that encounters were not only confrontational, they also included intimate contact. The exact circumstances remain unknown. Was it brief, scattered, or widespread? Archaeology cannot yet say, leaving much to speculation. At the planetary scale, the timing of these encounters coincides with shifting climates. Around 40 to 50,000 years ago, glacial advances transformed landscapes, altering routes for humans and animals alike. Open plains expanded, forests retreated, and ice pressed into valleys. Both Neanderthals and modern humans were forced to adapt, sometimes into the same regions. In this sense, climate acted as a mediator, bringing groups together by reshaping the land beneath their feet. Encounters were not only the result of migration, but of planetary rhythms unfolding over millennia. Consider the challenges both species faced. Mammoths, bison, and reindeer moved across the steppe, requiring coordinated hunting. Rivers froze, creating seasonal pathways, but also isolating groups during thaw. To survive, each species relied on cooperation within its own kind. When another human group appeared, with different faces, languages, and customs, the response may have been cautious curiosity or immediate suspicion. The truth likely varied, depending on place, time, and circumstance. Archaeological remains hint at symbolic lives on both sides. Neanderthals left traces of pigment use, possible ornaments, and burial practices. Modern humans carried beads, carvings, and ochre across long distances. When such groups met, they may have recognized something familiar: the use of fire, the shaping of tools, the presence of social bonds. Yet differences would have been evident too, in technology, in body shape, and perhaps in ways of organizing life. These similarities and contrasts together shaped the outcomes of their encounters. One unresolved puzzle is how long Neanderthals and modern humans overlapped in the far north. Some evidence suggests only a few centuries, a brief window in evolutionary terms. Others propose longer coexistence, with territories side by side for thousands of years. The dating of sites remains uncertain, complicated by disturbances in sediments and limits of radiocarbon techniques. Each new discovery has the potential to shift timelines dramatically, reminding us of how incomplete the picture remains. The scale of distance adds another layer. A journey between Neanderthal camps in Western Europe and modern human sites in Siberia spans thousands of kilometers, yet both belong to the same Ice Age world, linked by the mammoth steppe. Rivers, valleys, and plains formed corridors where movement was possible. Over time, waves of migration and settlement brought groups into contact across this immense geography. What might feel remote today was part of a continuous web of land, traversed by animals and humans alike. Some sites preserve poignant details. In Central Europe, a cave yielded ornaments made from animal teeth, typical of modern humans, alongside stone tools shaped in a Neanderthal tradition. Elsewhere, burned bones suggest that both groups shared similar diets and cooking methods. These fragments cannot tell us the emotions of their makers, but they show convergences in daily life. Fire, meat, tools, and shelter bound both species to the same survival tasks, even as their paths diverged. The legacy of these encounters endures in our own bodies. Neanderthal genes influence traits from immunity to skin adaptation, reminders of ancient contact. Though the species itself vanished around 30,000 years ago, it remains part of us. This genetic echo underscores the depth of connection. Encounters were not fleeting. They left marks that extend across continents and millennia, binding the fate of both species into a shared story. Yet the silence of absence is just as striking. After modern humans spread, Neanderthal sites dwindle and disappear, whether through competition, climate, or small population size. Their resilience faltered. The last survivors held on in isolated refuge, such as caves in Gibraltar, long after most of their kind had gone. By then, the Arctic frontiers were increasingly shaped by modern humans alone. The encounters of earlier centuries had passed into memory, leaving only bones, tools, and genes as witnesses. Step by step, the picture emerges, two kinds of humans sharing the same frozen plains, meeting along rivers and valleys, shaping tools, perhaps sharing knowledge, certainly sharing descendants. The details remain elusive, but the outlines are clear. The Arctic frontier was not entered by modern humans in isolation. It was a landscape already occupied, already human, and it became a stage where two lineages met. Their encounters, whether brief or enduring, left a legacy that still shapes us today. Siberia is vast. Its rivers, forests, and plains stretch across thousands of kilometers, forming one of the largest continuous land masses on Earth. For modern humans moving into the north during the Ice Age, Siberia became both corridor and challenge. It was here, among broad valleys and endless tundra, that groups established base camps anchoring their advance toward the Arctic Circle. These gateways, points of settlement along great rivers, became stepping stones in the long journey into colder worlds. The geography of Siberia is dominated by rivers. The Ob, Yenisei, and Lena carve immense paths across the land, draining meltwater from glaciers and mountains. In winter, they freeze solid, forming wide, white highways of ice. In summer, they swell with floods, their banks rich with grasses and wildlife. For humans, these rivers offered food, travel routes, and familiar landmarks in an otherwise uniform landscape. Camps established along their banks provided stability, places to return to season after season, linking past with future. Archaeological sites in these regions reveal how humans adapted to the Siberian environment. Stone tools, long blades, barons, scrapers are found scattered in river terraces and loess deposits. Animal bones, cracked for marrow and burned for fuel, lie beside ancient hearths. At some sites, mammoth tusks and bones appear arranged, hinting at structures or shelters. These traces suggest not just temporary visits but repeated occupations. The Siberian gateways were not mere stopovers, they were homes, however fragile, in a demanding world. One lesser-known detail comes from the discovery of tiny beads made from ivory and animal teeth. At sites like Yana RHS, far to the north, dozens of such ornaments have been unearthed. Their presence shows that even at the edge of survival, humans carried symbolic practices. Beads required time, patience, and skill to produce. They were not essential for warmth or food, yet they traveled with people into the coldest reaches. This detail highlights the persistence of culture alongside adaptation. The North was entered not only with tools of survival but with expressions of identity. The gateways also functioned as nodes of movement. From base camp, small groups could radiate outward, hunting in the tundra, fishing in rivers, foraging in sheltered valleys. When conditions worsened, they could return, rebuild fires, and rely on stored resources. The archaeological layering at these sites indicates repeated use across centuries, perhaps millennia. Knowledge of good locations, where animals crossed, where fish spawned, where shelter could be found, was preserved and transmitted. In this way, Siberia was not an empty expanse but a map of remembered places. Still, mysteries remain about the pace of occupation. Did humans move into Siberia gradually, with small groups pushing farther north each generation? Or were there sudden advances, with large populations establishing themselves quickly along new rivers? Radiocarbon dates suggest pulses of expansion, but the evidence is incomplete. Some periods show rich occupation, others silence. Perhaps climate shifts opened corridors at times, then closed them again, forcing retreat. The story is not linear but rhythmic, tied to cycles of glacial advance and retreat. At the planetary scale, Siberia's role is immense. During the last glacial maximum, vast portions of the northern hemisphere were locked in ice, but Siberia remained largely unglaciated. Instead, it formed a cold, dry plain, covered in steppe tundra. This unique condition made it a refuge and a highway, allowing animals and humans to move eastward even when Europe and North America were sealed by glaciers. Siberia thus became a hinge of global migration, connecting continents through its open expanses. The distance involved is staggering. From the Ural Mountains to the Lena Delta spans more than 3,000 kilometers. For small human groups, such distances were not crossed in a single lifetime, but in successive steps. Camps along rivers served as anchors, each within reach of the next. In this way, Siberia was crossed not by sudden leaps, but by gradual accumulation, each generation adding to the knowledge of land and season. The gateways mark this process, each site a station in the unfolding journey. The remains of animals reveal much about life in these camps. Reindeer bones dominate many deposits, showing their importance as a staple. Mammoth remains appear less frequently, but provided immense resources when obtained. Small animals, such as hares and foxes, are also common. Evidence of diversified hunting. Fish bones indicate seasonal exploitation of rivers. Together, these finds show that Siberian camps balanced large and small resources, building resilience against the uncertainty of any single prey. In this environment, flexibility was survival. One unresolved question concerns the movement of ideas between groups. Some stone tool traditions in Siberia resemble those found farther west in Europe. Others show unique local adaptations. Did groups carry traditions intact across continents? Or did techniques spread through encounters and exchanges among different peoples? The similarity of some artifacts suggests contact, but the vast distances make this uncertain. The gateways of Siberia may have been crossroads where traditions mingled, though the details remain hidden in silence. The role of fire, too, is clear in these sites. Hearths with layers of ash and burned bone point to repeated use. In winter, when wood was scarce, bone fuel sustained flames. Fire not only warmed but defined space, creating centers around which life unfolded. The remains of burned antler and ivory show how every material was pressed into service. In the Siberian gateways, fire linked the immediate needs of warmth and cooking to the larger rhythms of occupation and return. Imagine a camp on the banks of the Yenisei more than 30,000 years ago. The river lies frozen, its surface gleaming under pale light. A circle of mammoth bones supports hides stretched against the wind. Inside, a fire smoulders, fed with fragments of bone. Around it lie tools of stone and ivory, beads strung on sinew, scraps of reindeer hide being sewn into clothing. Outside, the land is silent, but for the distant call of wolves. This camp is not permanent, yet it is home, a gateway into the vast north. The significance of these Siberian bases cannot be overstated. Without them, Movement into the Arctic would have been impossible. They provided places of rest, accumulation, and knowledge. They allowed humans to test the limits of cold and to prepare for journeys farther still. They anchored communities in landscapes where nothing seemed stable, offering continuity against the flux of ice and climate. Each hearth, each bead, each stone blade is a record of resilience at the edge of the habitable world. Step by step, the gateways carried humans closer to the ultimate frontier. Siberia, immense and forbidding, became traversable not because it was easy, but because it was learned. Through camps along rivers, through repeated occupations, through the endurance of small group E, it was transformed into a lived space. These gateways stand as testimony to the human capacity for adaptation, fragile in number, yet immense in reach. Beyond them lay the high Arctic, and beyond that, new continents waiting across frozen seas. Far north, at 71 degrees latitude, lies the valley of the Yana River. Today, it is a remote, icy land, with permafrost stretching in every direction and winters that plunge into months of darkness. Yet more than 30,000 years ago, humans lived here. Archaeological discoveries at Yana RHS, a site uncovered in frozen sediments, reveal the earliest evidence of people dwelling so far above the Arctic Circle. Their presence challenges assumptions about where humans could survive and forces us to rethink the limits of Ice Age life. The Yana River site was discovered at the turn of the 21st century. Permafrost preserved artifacts in remarkable condition, offering a rare window into a world that otherwise would have been erased by time. Excavations revealed thousands of stone tools, bone implements, ivory ornaments, and animal remains. Among them were spear points carved from mammoth ivory, delicate needles, and beads crafted from animal teeth. The assemblage speaks of a community not merely passing through, but established, skilled, and resourceful. These were not accidental visitors to the Arctic. They were settlers. The scale of occupation is striking. Layers of sediment suggest repeated use of the site over centuries. Hearths, ash deposits, and concentrations of tools indicate sustained living spaces. The density of remains points to groups returning again and again, building a tradition of survival in the high Arctic. This was not exploration at the edge, it was habitation, rooted in knowledge passed across generations. Animals form the heart of the record. Mammoth bones dominate, alongside reindeer, bison, and horse. Cut marks show systematic butchery, marrow extraction, and hide processing. Smaller animals, such as hares and foxes, also appear, evidence that people diversified their hunting to guard against scarcity. The presence of fish bones confirms the use of rivers for food. In this cold, humans wove together many resources, crafting a balanced subsistence strategy. It was not reliance on a single prey, but a flexible web of survival. One lesser-known detail from Yana is the discovery of personal ornaments. Beads, pendants, and carved objects were found in abundance. Some are made from ivory, others from animal teeth carefully drilled for suspension. Their existence highlights the persistence of symbolic life in harsh conditions. To craft ornaments requires time beyond basic survival. It suggests identity, communication, or perhaps ritual. Even here, at the edge of the habitable world, humans expressed meaning beyond the immediate needs of warmth and food. Yet mysteries remain. How did humans reach the Yana so early? The site dates to around 32,000 years ago. much earlier than previously expected for sustained Arctic settlement. Did groups move rapidly northward from central Siberia, carrying with them skills for clothing, shelter, and fire? Or were these adaptations developed locally, over many generations of experimentation? The evidence does not yet answer. The speed and routes of migration into the Arctic remain subjects of debate, tied to climate shifts and the availability of prey. At the planetary scale, the Yana occupation coincides with a colder phase of the Ice Age. Glaciers locked water into ice, lowering sea levels and exposing new land in Beringia. The mammoth steppe extended across continents, providing grazing for herds that humans followed. In this broader rhythm, the Yana site represents not isolation, but connection. It shows that even at 71 degrees north, humans were part of a vast ecosystem stretching from Europe to Alaska, bound by grasses, animals, and rivers. The technological evidence reinforces this. Tools at Yana are finely made, with long blades struck from prepared cores. Burins and scrapers show hide processing, critical for tailored clothing. Ivory spear points reveal adaptation to hunting large animals in open plains. The presence of needles confirms sewing, allowing garments fitted against wind and snow. Together, these artifacts demonstrate mastery of survival technologies. Without them, life at Yana would have been impossible. Consider the scene, a camp set on a river terrace overlooking frozen water. A circle of mammoth bones marks the outline of a shelter. Hides stretched tight against frames of tusks. Inside, a hearth glows, fed with bone and dung. Needles, beads, and tools lie scattered on the floor, some half-finished. Outside, hunters return with reindeer carcasses, dragging them over ice. The Arctic night is silent, but for the crackle of fire and the distant movement of herds. This was daily life at Yana, preserved in frozen ground. The scale of distance makes the achievement remarkable. The Yana lies thousands of kilometers from more temperate regions where humans had long lived. To reach it required crossing endless plains, navigating frozen rivers, and enduring winters of unrelenting cold. Each step north demanded new adaptations, new strategies, new knowledge. Yet by the time people stood at Yana, they had woven these elements into a system capable of sustaining them indefinitely. The Arctic frontier had been crossed. One unresolved puzzle concerns the population size of these groups. Was Yana home to a large, stable community, or to small bands rotating through seasonally? The density of remains suggests more than a handful of people, but the exact numbers are unknown. Genetic studies hint that populations in Siberia were small, isolated, and vulnerable, yet still capable of persistence. The Yana site embodies this paradox: fragility and endurance bound together in one frozen archive. The preservation of artifacts offers another planetary insight. Permafrost, by freezing organic material, captured details rarely seen elsewhere. Needles, beads, and ivory tools would normally decay, but here they remain intact. This accident of geology gives us a rare glimpse of Ice Age life in full richness. Without permafrost, much of this story would vanish, leaving only stone and bone fragments. The Yana thus reminds us how dependent our knowledge is on the accidents of preservation. The cultural meaning of Yana is still debated. Was it primarily a hunting station, tied to the movements of herds, or a base camp supporting families year-round? The presence of ornaments and needles suggests domestic life. Not only male hunting expeditions, women, Children and elders may have lived here, enduring winters together. If so, Yana represents not temporary courage but long-term settlement, humans building lives, raising children, and weaving culture into one of the harshest environments on Earth. Over time, the Yana River camps became part of a larger network. Groups likely moved seasonally between valleys, returning to familiar places with each migration. Knowledge of the land accumulated, preserved in stories and skills. Rivers, mountains, and animal paths formed maps in memory, guiding movements across vast distances. The Arctic was no longer unknown. It was inhabited, marked with routes and campsites, inscribed with meaning. Yana was one of its earliest centers. Step by step, the mystery of Yana reminds us of human resilience. 32,000 years ago, at 71 degrees north, people carved ivory, sewed hides, and lit fires in the dark of Arctic nights. They transformed one of the planet's harshest frontiers into a livable home, though questions remain about roots, populations, and meanings. The site stands as testimony to endurance. The frozen river valley, silent today, still holds echoes of hearths that burned, beads that shone, and voices that once carried in the Arctic wind. The North in the Ice Age was never still. Across thousands of kilometers, ice sheets advanced and retreated like living giants. They grew over centuries, locked water into frozen masses, then shrank again when climate warmed. These slow movements reshaped rivers, valleys, and plains, altering the paths available to animals and humans. For those who tried to survive on the edge of the Arctic, the shadows of these ice sheets defined the horizon and dictated the possibilities of life. Two major ice systems dominated Eurasia, the Scandinavian ice sheet in the west and the Siberian glaciers in the east. At their peak, they covered millions of square kilometers, burying mountains and pressing into lowlands. Their weight carved fjords, scoured plains, and left behind moraines of rock and gravel. To humans, these immense bodies of ice were not abstract. They were walls, obstacles that blocked movement, chilled winds, and forced detours across thousands of kilometers. No path into the far north could ignore them. The effect on rivers was profound. Glaciers dammed valley, redirecting flows and creating new lakes. When ice melted, floods tore through the land, carving new channels overnight. For groups dependent on rivers as guides and sources of food, these changes demanded constant adaptation. A familiar crossing could vanish within a generation, replaced by torrents or blocked by ice walls. Archaeological evidence along the Ob and Yenisei valleys shows shifting occupation patterns that mirror these changes. Campsites appear, disappear, and reappear in step with the pulse of ice. One lesser-known detail comes from pollen analysis in Siberian sediments. Samples show sudden transitions between grass-dominated steppe and shrub-rich tundra, reflecting rapid climate oscillations. These swings often coincided with glacial advances or retreats. For humans, the change meant shifting prey. Reindeer and bison thrived in open grasslands, while mammoths could graze only where steppe vegetation persisted. When shrubs spread, herds moved elsewhere, and humans had to follow. Even subtle shifts in plant cover rippled through the entire system of survival. Mysteries remain about how close humans came to the great ice sheets themselves. Did groups approach their margins, using meltwater rivers and hunting animals drawn to fresh vegetation at the edges? Or did they keep distance, avoiding zones of instability where ice could carve, floods could erupt, and conditions were unpredictable? The archaeological record offers hints but no certainty. Sites cluster in valleys south of the main glacial fronts, suggesting caution. Yet isolated finds farther north raise questions about bolder movements. At the planetary scale, see, the ice sheets reshaped Earth's systems. Sea levels dropped by over 100 meters, exposing continental shelves and land bridges. Winds shifted, driven by temperature gradients between ice and open land. Dust storms carried fine sediments across Eurasia, depositing fertile loess that fed grasses of the mammoth steppe. The very air changed, colder, drier, with atmospheric circulation altered by ice. Humans living in this world were participants in a global drama, their local struggles tied to forces spanning continents. The scale of distance adds to the weight of these shadows. From the Scandinavian ice sheet in the west to the Pacific coast in the east stretched more than 5,000 kilometers of open steppe, tundra, and river valley. Yet the ice touched all of it, directly or indirectly. Winds blowing from its surface chilled regions far beyond its edge. Meltwater floods altered rivers that reached deep inland. The shadow of ice extended farther than the ice itself, a constant presence in the lives of those who lived nearby. Archaeological evidence reveals how humans adapted. Sites near glacial margins often contain large numbers of reindeer bones, suggesting targeted hunting of animals that thrived in transitional zones. Stone tools from these areas include long blades suitable for butchering many carcasses quickly, hinting at organized hunts timed with seasonal migrations. Hearths show intensive use of bone as fuel, reflecting scarcity of wood in landscapes scoured by ice. Each adaptation speaks of groups finding ways to survive in places shaped by glaciers' advance. One unresolved question concerns population stability. Did humans retreat south during glacial advances, abandoning northern regions entirely, or did small groups persist in pockets near ice margins? Some genetic studies suggest population bottlenecks, times when human numbers dwindled dramatically, perhaps due to climatic stress. Others argue for continuity, pointing to cultural traditions that span glacial cycles. The truth may be complex, repeated contractions and expansions, with groups leaving, returning, and leaving again in rhythm with the ice. Consider the experience of a group camped near a glacial valley. The horizon is dominated by a wall of white, its surface glittering in weak sunlight. At night, the temperature plunges, winds racing down from the ice with piercing chill. The river nearby is swollen with melt, its water cold and swift. Hunters watch reindeer crossing, spears ready. Children huddle near a fire fed with bones. Every moment is shaped by proximity to the glacier, its water, its winds, its resources, and its dangers. Life at the margin is both rich and precarious. The shadows of the ice sheets also left permanent marks on the land. As glaciers retreated, they exposed new valleys, deposited fertile soils, and created chains of lakes. Humans returning after centuries found landscapes transformed. Old camps were buried under gravel, rivers had shifted course, and animal ranges had changed. This constant reshaping meant that knowledge had to be renewed with each generation. Memory guided movement, but landscapes were never fixed. Adaptation was ongoing, written into the very rhythm of life. One lesser-known finding is the presence of bird remains in sites near glacial margins. Waterfowl gathered in meltwater lakes during summer, providing eggs and meat. Their seasonal abundance may have been crucial in bridging food shortages. Such resources show how humans exploited every opportunity. weaving together diets that balanced large game with smaller, seasonal harvests. Even in the shadow of glaciers, life could be sustained through attention to detail and flexibility in choice. The fragility of this way of life is evident. A sudden climatic shift could render a region uninhabitable. Too much cold, and vegetation vanished, too much thaw, and floods destroyed camps. Humans lived in a narrow band of possibility, always at risk of being squeezed between advancing ice and unstable lands. The courage of those who persisted is reflected not in conquest, but in patience, returning to river valleys when conditions allowed, leaving when they did not, always attentive to signs in the sky, the plants, and the herds. Step by step, the presence of glaciers defined the tempo of migration. The ice sheets were barriers, but they were also guides. They forced routes southward, concentrated animals in valleys, and shaped the rhythm of rivers. In this sense, they were not only obstacles, but frameworks within which human life unfolded. The shadows of the ice were long, but within those shadows, humans endured, adapted, and prepared for further journeys into the far north. The Arctic is not only a place of ice and wind, it is also a place of darkness. For humans moving far north during the Ice Age, the greatest challenge was not always cold or hunger, but the long winter night. In these high latitudes, the sun slips below the horizon for weeks, sometimes months. What remains is twilight at noon, a faint glow on the southern edge of the sky, and then darkness that presses down with endless weight. To endure the frozen nights demanded patience, planning, and resilience beyond measure. Darkness alters everything. Hunting becomes limited, travel hazardous, and the rhythm of daily life uncertain. Fire provides light, but its glow reaches only a few meters beyond the hearth. Beyond that circle lies silence and shadow. For humans who relied on sight to read tracks, find prey, and watch for predators, the loss of light meant new strategies. They learned to prepare in advance, storing food, repairing clothing, and fortifying shelters before the sun disappeared. Each winter was a test of preparation made during summer and autumn. Archaeological evidence supports this picture of seasonal planning. In sites across Siberia, layers of bones show seasonal hunting, especially of reindeer and fish. Meat was dried, fat rendered, and marrow stored. Hides were sewn into warm clothing long before frost set in. Hearths show repeated burning, suggesting fires maintained continuously through long, dark months. The presence of multiple hearths within a single shelter implies shared effort, each family tending flames that kept life possible. The frozen nights were not endured spontaneously, they were met with foresight. One lesser-known detail comes from microscopic analysis of burned bones. Some fragments reveal repeated heating, showing that bones were not burned once, but used again and again as fuel. This recycling suggests scarcity of resources and careful management of fire. In the absence of wood, every scrap of usable material mattered. The frozen night demanded frugality as much as skill, a discipline of stretching limited supplies across months without daylight. Still, mysteries remain about how humans adapted psychologically. Did they develop new rhythms of sleep and wake, living by firelight rather than sunlight? Did they sing, tell stories, or carve ornaments to pass time during the endless night? Artifacts found in Arctic sites, beads, figurines, decorated tools, hint at symbolic or communal activities, but their exact role remains unknown. What is clear is that humans survived not only with their bodies, but with minds capable of finding meaning in darkness. At the planetary scale, the frozen nights reflect Earth's tilt on its axis. The same tilt that creates seasons elsewhere produces polar night in the far north. While ice sheets reshaped land and climate, it was this axial geometry that brought cycles of light and dark. Humans living under these skies were confronting not just local weather, but the very structure of the planet's movement around the sun. Their endurance tied them directly to cosmic rhythms, small communities adjusting to astronomical realities. The distance from temperate lands to the Arctic Circle also meant distance from familiar routines. In lower latitudes, night and day alternate regularly. Crops grow, seasons shift predictably, and activities follow the sun. In the Arctic, such patterns collapse. Darkness reigns for months, then yields to months of near-continuous daylight. For humans, used to balance, this inversion required profound adaptation. It meant reorganizing life around scarcity followed by abundance, long waiting followed by frantic activity. The frozen nights forced a new tempo, unfamiliar but enduring. Shelters reveal part of the story. Mammoth bone dwellings, circular and insulated with hides, could withstand storms and trap heat from hearths. Inside, tasks were possible even in darkness. Needles and scrapers, polished from long use, suggest continual work, sewing, repairing, carving. Firelight glinting off beads and ornaments implies moments of artistry and symbolism. In the absence of sun, the hearth became both workshop and sanctuary. Every corner of the shelter reflected adaptation to the rhythm of the night. Food storage techniques also hint at survival strategies. Frozen ground acted as natural preservation. Meat buried in pits or kept outside in sub-zero temperatures could last for months. Fish, smoked over summer fires, provided protein when hunting was limited. Fat rendered from reindeer or bison became a dense energy source, stored in skins or bones. Such preparations transformed summer abundance into winter endurance. The frozen night was not a season of hunting, but of consuming carefully saved reserves. One unresolved question is how humans navigated during the dark. Did they move at all, or remain in one place until spring? The absence of light made long journeys hazardous, yet tracks in snow, the stars, and the glow of aurora may have offered guidance. Archaeological finds suggest that some winter hunting did occur, targeting animals like hare and fox. Whether groups ventured far or stayed close, survival depended on balancing risk with necessity, never straying too far into the shadows. The frozen nights also brought silence. Winds howled, wolves howled, but many animals migrated south, leaving emptiness behind. For humans, this silence may have been profound, broken only by the crack of ice, the call of a raven, or the voice of another person by the fire. Such conditions could test morale. Yet the persistence of ornaments and decorated tools suggests that people found ways to create meaning in stillness. Symbolic activity may have been most important in the times when outer activity was least possible. At the planetary level, auroras must have danced across the Arctic sky, green and red curtains flickering above the darkness. To humans gathered around hearths, these lights may have been awe-inspiring, though their meaning remains lost to us. Their presence reminds us that even in the frozen night, the sky offered beauty, a counterbalance to the challenges of survival, natural wonders, firelight, and shared presence made the darkness something more than emptiness. Consider a camp deep in winter. Outside, snow lies heavy across the steppe. The river is frozen solid, its surface gleaming faintly in starlight. Inside a mammoth bone hut, a fire burns low, filling the air with warmth and smoke. Around it sit families, repairing clothing, carving beads, telling quiet stories. Food is passed from hand to hand, dried meat, rendered fat, marrow boiled into broth. The night outside is endless, but within the circle of fire, life continues. This scene, repeated across centuries, shows the resilience that made Arctic life possible. The frozen nights did not defeat humanity. They tested, shaped, and refined it. Each winter required foresight, cooperation, and endurance. Each spring rewarded preparation with survival. Over generations, humans learned to live not only with the land but with its rhythms of light and dark. They made the Arctic habitable, not by overcoming darkness, but by living within it, creating warmth, culture, and meaning in its midst. Step by step, the story of the frozen nights reveals human resilience at its most profound. These were not temporary camps or daring explorations. They were lived seasons, endured year after year, carved into memory. The Arctic became not just a frontier, but a home, even under skies without sun. The frozen nights, long and still, were transformed from obstacles into part of life itself. At the far northeastern edge of Siberia, the land stretches outward in a plain that once did not end with the sea. During the Ice Age, when glaciers locked vast amounts of water in ice, sea levels dropped more than 100 meters. Where today, the Bering Strait divides Asia and North America. There was once a broad land bridge. This was Beringia, a world of grass, rivers, and tundra, exposed to the winds of the Arctic, but rich in life. It connected continents, shaped migrations, and became a stage for human endurance at the very limits of cold. Beringia was immense. At its greatest extent, it covered nearly 2 million square kilometers, larger than modern Mexico. It stretched from the Yana River in Siberia to the Yukon in Alaska, bridging what are now oceans. It was not a narrow corridor, but a continent in itself, with valleys, hills, and wide plains. To humans, it offered both opportunity and challenge. It opened routes to new lands, but it also demanded survival in an environment of harsh winters, scarce wood, and unpredictable storms. Archaeological evidence from Siberia shows that humans reached the approaches to Beringia tens of thousands of years ago. Sites like Yana, hundreds of kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, prove that people were already accustomed to extreme conditions. From such bases, the step into Beringia was possible. The land bridge itself has yielded fewer remains. Many are now submerged, but indirect evidence points to human presence. Stone tools, animal bones with cut marks, and traces of hearths in Alaska suggest that people used Beringia as both highway and homeland. The animals of Beringia were central to survival. Mammoths roamed its plains, joined by bison, horses, and reindeer. Caribou migrated in immense herds, providing meat and hides. Wolves and lions prowled its edges, while Arctic foxes and hares offered furs. Rivers carried salmon in their seasons, and birds filled the skies in summer. Humans entering this land stepped into an ecosystem alive with resources, if they had the skills to use them. The diversity of remains found at later sites in Alaska suggests that they did. One lesser-known detail about Beringia lies in the permafrost deposits that preserve ancient plants. Analysis of pollen shows that this plain was not barren tundra, but a productive grassland with hundreds of species of grasses and herbs. Scientists call it the mammoth steppe, a biome unlike anything today. Its richness explains how both large animals and humans could survive in such cold. Though the winds were fierce and the winters long, the land itself was fertile in its own way, sustaining life across millennia. Still, mysteries remain. Did humans cross Beringia early, soon after entering Siberia? Or did they remain in the region for thousands of years before continuing into the Americas? Genetic studies hint at a pause. Populations may have lived in Beringia in isolation, separated from other humans, for centuries. Archaeologists call this the Beringian standstill. If true, it means Beringia was not only a passage, but also a homeland, where humans adapted fully to Arctic life before moving farther. Yet the timing remains debated, with dates ranging between 30 and 15,000 years ago. At the planetary scale, Beringia reflects the interconnectedness of Earth's systems. Glaciers in Canada and Scandinavia drew down oceans, exposing land thousands of kilometers away. Winds carried dust from Central Asia, depositing it on Beringian plains. The tilt of Earth's axis shaped the seasons, bringing long summers of light and long winters of darkness. Humans who lived here were bound into these cycles, their survival tied directly to changes in ice, sea, and sun. The distance involved underscores the achievement. From western Siberia to Alaska spans more than 4,000 kilometers. For a small human group, this was not a single migration but a gradual expansion across generations. Camps along rivers, valleys, and plains marked each stage. When they reached Beringia, they stood at the threshold of a new continent, though they may not have known it. The land stretched so wide that it seemed endless, a continuation of the steppe they had always known. The technology carried into Beringia reveals preparation. Stone blades and ivory points suited for hunting large animals appear in sites on both sides of the strait. Needles for sewing warm clothing ensured protection against wind. Shelters made of bones and hides provided insulation. Fires, fueled by bone and dung, lit the nights. These were not experiments at the edge of possibility, but established systems of survival. Beringia did not create new humans. It demanded the best of what they already knew. Imagine a camp on the Beringian plain. The horizon is wide and flat, the air sharp with cold. Mammoths graze in the distance, their silhouettes dark against pale snow. A cluster of shelters stands near a river, hides stretched over frames of tusks. Inside, fire crackles. Needles flash in dim light as garments are repaired. Outside, hunters drag reindeer carcasses across ice, while children gather frozen grasses for tinder. Above, the sky glows faintly with northern lights. This is not passage. It is settlement, life continuing on the edge of continents. One unresolved question concerns the routes humans took through Beringia. Did they remain inland, following herds across plains? Or did they move along coasts, harvesting fish and marine resources? Geological changes have hidden much evidence, as ancient shorelines now lie underwater. Both paths may have been used, perhaps at different times. Inland and coastal routes are not mutually exclusive. Together, They form a picture of flexible, adaptive movement. Beringia also highlights the fragility of human populations. Genetic studies suggest that the groups here were small, perhaps only a few thousand people. Isolation, combined with climatic stress, could easily have led to extinction. Yet they endured, leaving descendants who spread across the Americas. Their persistence shows the strength of adaptation, the ability to survive even when numbers were few and conditions harsh. The legacy of Beringia is profound. It represents one of the last great thresholds of Ice Age migration, a bridge between worlds. It was shaped by climate, but filled with human life, adorned with beads and tools, sustained by fire and meat. Though most of it now lies beneath the sea, its memory survives in frozen soils, in the DNA of living peoples, and in the traces of camps left behind. Step by step, humans turned the Beringian plain into part of their world. It was both highway and homeland, both threshold and destination. In its wind-swept expanse, people endured long winters, waited through frozen nights, and prepared for journeys farther still. The Beringian world, vast and now vanished, stands as testimony to resilience at the meeting point of continents. Beyond the Siberian gateways and the wide Beringian plain lies the true high Arctic, tundra, land swept by wind, frozen seas along coasts, and a climate harsher than anything most Ice Age humans had faced before. Yet here, too, traces of human presence have been found. Archaeological remains show that small groups not only ventured into these northernmost zones, but stayed long enough to hunt, build dwellings, and leave marks in the frozen ground. These hunters of the high Arctic pushed human resilience to its limits. The environment was stark, trees vanished entirely, replaced by mosses, lichens, and hardy grasses. The ground remained frozen year-round, with only a thin surface thaw in summer. Winters were long and dark, summers short, but filled with light. Winds swept across open tundra, piling snow into ridges and stripping exposed ridges bare. Animals moved in seasonal cycles. Caribou and reindeer migrated across valleys. Musk ox grazed in small herds, and mammoths roamed where grasses were still plentiful. Predators, wolves, wolverines, and bears stalked the same paths. For humans, this was no gentle frontier. It was a place where every decision carried risk. Archaeological sites north of the Arctic Circle, such as those along the Yana River and further toward the Lena Delta, reveal evidence of dwellings built from bone and hide. Mammoth ribs and tusks were arranged into frames, then covered with hides weighted by stone. Some shelters were partially dug into the ground, using permafrost itself as insulation. Inside, hearths burned with bone and dung fuel. These fragile structures, preserved in frozen soil, demonstrate that humans were not merely passing visitors. They created homes adapted to Arctic conditions. One lesser-known detail comes from worked antler found in these northern sites. The antler was shaped into wedges and points, tools well suited for breaking ice or digging frozen soil. Such implements suggest tasks beyond hunting: cutting holes for fishing, extracting frozen meat, or anchoring shelters against wind. They show the versatility required to endure in the high Arctic, where survival meant meeting many needs with limited materials. Still, mysteries surround the timing and extent of occupation. Some researchers argue that humans reached the high Arctic only during periods of relative warmth, when summers offered more vegetation and prey. Others believe groups endured even during colder intervals, supported by mammoth hunting and careful storage. Radiocarbon dates remain few, and many sites are difficult to interpret because permafrost both preserves and disturbs remains. The question of how continuous Arctic habitation was remains open. At the planetary scale, these occupations coincide with dramatic climatic swings. Around 30,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum approached. Glaciers thickened, and climates across Eurasia grew colder. Yet the mammoth steppe extended far north, keeping grasslands open even in tundra zones. This global rhythm created pockets of opportunity. Where grass persisted, herds survived. Where herds survived, humans followed. Thus, even the far Arctic became part of the human world, tied to planetary cycles of ice and vegetation. The distance to reach these regions was immense. From central Siberia to the Lena Delta spans thousands of kilometers of tundra and river valley. For small group, this meant gradual expansion, building camps along rivers, then pushing farther with each generation. The archaeological record reflects this stepwise pattern. Camps cluster near water, where fish, game, and transport routes converged. Beyond them, the open tundra stretched, demanding boldness and skill to traverse. Each new settlement marked another step into the Arctic unknown. Food sources reveal how humans adapted. Mammoth and reindeer dominate many sites, their bones showing cut marks from systematic butchery. But smaller animals, hares, foxes, and birds also appear frequently. Their furs provided vital warmth, and their meat filled gaps when larger prey was scarce. Fish bones, though less common, indicate that rivers and lakes were tapped for seasonal food. Together, these finds show a flexible strategy. No resource was ignored. The hunters of the high Arctic lived by weaving many strands of food and material into survival. One unresolved question concerns mobility. Did groups remain in high Arctic zones year-round, or did they move south during the harshest winters? Some shelters suggest long-term occupation, with multiple hearths and dense artifact scatters. Others seem seasonal, lightly used, perhaps by hunting parties. Without written records, the rhythm of their life is difficult to fix. What is certain is that humans reached farther north than once believed, challenging assumptions about Ice Age limits. Shelters also reveal ingenuity in design. In some cases, where bones were arranged not only as structural supports but as windbreaks around entrances. Paths of trampled snow suggest organized movement within camps. Fire-cracked rocks show heating of stones, perhaps to extend warmth after flames died. These details indicate more than crude improvisation. They reflect a body of knowledge, adapted over generations, refined through experience in cold. Each improvement increased chances of survival, anchoring life in hostile conditions. Symbolic traces appear here as well. Beads, pendants, and carved ivory fragments have been found in Arctic sites, even where conditions were most severe. Their presence raises questions. Why devote time to ornament when survival was so demanding? Perhaps ornaments reinforced social bond, marked identity, or offered comfort during long nights. Whatever their meaning, they show that even in the high Arctic, humans carried more than tools. They carried culture, memory, and imagination into the frozen north. The fragility of this record is striking. Permafrost preserves organic material, but it also shifts and disturbs layers. A single thaw can move bones or tools, mixing evidence from different times. This complicates interpretation, leaving gaps in knowledge. Archaeologists must piece together fragments, aware that much has been lost. Still, enough remains to show that the high Arctic was not empty. It held hunters, families, and communities who left traces in frost and soil. Consider a scene along the Lena Delta 30,000 years ago. The river lies frozen, its surface glowing under moonlight. A cluster of shelters stands near its bank, their frames of bone hidden under stretched hides. Inside, firelight flickers, illuminating beads strung on sinew, needles stitching garments of fur, and scrapers cleaning hides. Outside, hunters prepare sledges of frozen meat, while wolves circle at a distance. The air is silent, except for the crack of ice and the howl of wind. In this place of extremity, life endures. At the planetary level, such camps mark humanity's expansion into nearly every environment available, from equatorial forests to deserts, from temperate valleys to Arctic tundra. Humans had adapted. The high Arctic was one of the final frontiers, a place that tested ingenuity and cooperation. Its occupation stands as proof of flexibility. Small populations, fragile in number, but immense in reach, able to survive where few other species could. Step by step, the hunters of the high Arctic turned cold into habitat. They stitched clothing, built shelters, stored food, and carried culture into the darkest nights. Their traces, preserved in frozen ground, remind us that survival here was never easy. Yet it was achieved not once, but across centuries. The high Arctic was not empty in the Ice Age. It was part of the human world, inhabited by those who dared its winds and left their story in bones and beads beneath the frost. The paths that humans took into the Arctic remain uncertain. Archaeology gives fragments, genetics adds hints, and climate science outlines possibilities. Yet no single map can show with certainty how the first migrations unfolded. Instead, we are left with unanswered roots, lines of movement drawn in speculation, grounded in partial evidence, and shaped by the vast, shifting landscapes of the Ice Age. These questions remain among the most enduring mysteries of northern prehistory. Rivers seem an obvious choice. From the Urals to the Lena, valleys offered predictable pathways, water, and seasonal resources. Many sites cluster along river terraces, suggesting that groups followed these arteries deep into Siberia. Rivers also served as guides through uniform tundra, their courses easy to remember and transmit through generations. Frozen in winter, they became highways of ice, carrying hunters and families across otherwise impassable terrain. Archaeological evidence of camps along the Ob, Yenisei, and Lena supports this view. Yet whether these valleys formed the main corridors or only parts of larger networks is still debated. Coastal routes present another possibility. When sea levels fell, shorelines stretched outward, exposing new land. Along the Arctic Ocean and Pacific coasts, plains emerged where today waves roll. Some scholars propose that humans traveled these coasts, exploiting marine resources and moving more quickly than inland routes allowed. The challenge is evidence. Ancient shorelines now lie submerged, their camps lost beneath water. Without excavation of these drowned lands, the coastal hypothesis remains plausible but difficult to prove. Inland plains provide a third option. The mammoth steppe stretched across Eurasia, offering herds of bison, horse, and mammoth. Following these animals, humans could move steadily across open ground. Archaeological traces scattered in loess deposits and steppe valleys suggest wide-ranging mobility. Yet open plains lack the predictable resources of rivers and the guidance of coastlines. Moving inland required sharper memory, stronger cooperation, and deeper knowledge of animal behavior. Did humans risk such routes often, or were they only secondary paths when rivers and coasts failed? The record is silent. One lesser-known detail comes from ancient DNA studies of sediments. At some Siberian sites, genetic material from humans has been detected even when artifacts are absent. This shows that people may have passed through quickly, leaving few physical traces. Such ghost routes remind us that archaeology captures only part of reality. Humans may have moved in ways we cannot see, their paths erased by floods, permafrost shifts, or simple absence of material culture. The true extent of their mobility remains hidden. Mysteries deepen when considering the crossing into the Americas. Did groups move directly through Beringia once conditions allowed, or did they remain in that region for thousands of years before continuing? Genetic evidence suggests a pause, perhaps for centuries, in what scientists call the Beringian standstill. Archaeological proof, however, is thin, leaving questions unresolved. The answer depends partly on which routes within Beringia were taken, coastal edges, river valleys, or inland plains, all still debated. At the planetary scale, these unanswered routes mirror the instability of the Ice Age world. Glaciers advanced and retreated, rivers changed course, coastlines shifted. A path open in one generation could vanish in the next. Humans navigating this landscape faced not fixed roads but moving targets, corridors that opened and closed with climate. To trace their routes today is to reconstruct a geography in motion, where uncertainty was the rule and adaptation the response. The scale of distance magnifies this uncertainty. From Europe's edges to Beringia spans more than 5,000 kilometers. For small bands, such distance was not covered in one sweep, but in steppes across centuries. Camps along rivers, plains, and valleys served as anchors. Yet we do not know which sequences they followed, whether a continuous eastward drift, repeated expansions and retreats, or branching dispersals in many directions. Each possibility paints a different picture of human history, but the evidence does not yet decide among them. Archaeological gaps frustrate researchers. Between well-studied sites, hundreds of kilometers often lie empty of evidence. Is this absence due to real avoidance, or has material simply not survived? Permafrost preserves some remains but destroys others through movement of soil. Rising seas drowned coastal plains where camps once stood. The unanswered routes are partly the product of preservation, the luck of what remains and what is lost. Our maps of migration are shaped as much by absence as by presence. One unresolved question concerns seasonality. Did humans move only in summer, when travel was easier and resources abundant? Or did they also press forward in winter, using frozen rivers as paths? Seasonal occupation layers at some sites suggest both. Yet without continuous records, the pattern is unclear. If winter routes were used, then humans may have traveled farther and faster than assumed, taking advantage of ice as solid ground. If not, progress may have been slower, limited by thaw and flood. Both possibilities remain open. The unanswered routes also reflect cultural diversity. Different groups may have chosen different strategies, some hugging rivers, others following herds, still others testing coasts. The archaeological record often treats humans as a single actor. But in reality, many communities with varied traditions moved across these lands. Their routes may have crossed, diverged, or merged, creating a tapestry of mobility rather than a single line. The absence of direct evidence leaves this tapestry incomplete, but its threads can still be glimpsed. Consider a band moving along a river valley, perhaps the Yenisei. They follow reindeer north in summer, fishing along the way. Camps are established at familiar terraces, fires lit with bone fuel. Another group, farther east, chooses the coast, gathering shellfish and hunting seals on exposed plains. Still another follows mammoth herds inland. Each route is different, yet all are part of the same broader expansion. The unanswered roots remind us that human history was not one story, but many, overlapping across landscapes now altered or lost. At the planetary level, these unanswered questions show the limits of our knowledge. Ice, sea, and time have erased much of the record. Yet the fragments that remain, stone blades, beads, hearths, and bones, still testify to immense journeys. They show that humans reached the Arctic, crossed Siberia, and entered Beringia. The exact paths remain uncertain, but the outcome is undeniable. People stood on the northern plains, lived in shelters of bone and hide, and left descendants who would spread across continents. Step by step, the unanswered roots remind us of the humility required in studying prehistory. We do not yet know which valleys they followed, which coasts they walked, or which plains they crossed, but we know they endured, and that endurance was enough to carry humanity into the far north. The shadows of their paths remain, faint but enduring, etched in stone and ice, waiting for discoveries yet to come. At the edge of the Ice Age world, humans stood in places where few species could survive. The Arctic, with its endless tundra, frozen rivers, and long nights, tested every skill, every tool, and every form of cooperation that people possessed. Yet they endured. The traces left behind, stone blades, beads of ivory, mammoth bone shelters, burned fragments of fuel, tell a story of persistence at the margins of habitability. It was here, at the limits of cold, that humanity proved its capacity to adapt not only to changing environments, but to extremes that seemed almost beyond reach. The achievement was not inevitable. For much of prehistory, the Arctic remained untouched. Other species of humans, including Neanderthals and Denisovans, reached high latitudes, but only modern humans pushed fully into the far north, establishing camps above the Arctic Circle. This expansion required a combination of technologies and practices: tailored clothing sewn with bone needles, dwellings built from bones and hides, storage of food in frozen ground, and mastery of fire using scarce fuel. Without these, entry into the Arctic would have ended in failure. Archaeological sites across Siberia and Beringia mark the extent of this endurance. From the Yana River to the Kolyma and beyond, layers of artifacts record repeated occupation. People did not simply pass through, they returned, rebuilt, and persisted. Each hearth preserved in permafrost is a sign of continuity. Each ornament carved from ivory is a sign of culture carried forward. These traces show not survival in desperation, but life made sustainable, even meaningful, in the harshest conditions known to Ice Age humans. One lesser-known detail emerges from genetic studies of ancient remains. DNA recovered from sediments and bones in Siberia reveals lineages distinct from those farther south, suggesting that Arctic groups were isolated for long periods. These populations were small, numbering in the thousands at most, yet they endured for centuries. Their survival shows that even fragile groups cut off by climate and distance, could sustain themselves with careful planning and adaptation. The genetic echoes of their presence remain in later peoples of the region, binding the story of endurance to living memory. Mysteries remain about how these groups perceived their world. Did they see themselves as explorers at the edge, or simply as families living key where animals and rivers provided sustenance? The archaeological record cannot tell us. Yet the persistence of symbolic objects, beads, pendants, pigments, suggests that they carried identity and meaning into the Arctic. They did not abandon culture for mere survival. Even in small camps beneath auroras, they marked their presence with signs of expression. This continuity of symbolic life is as striking as their physical endurance. At the planetary scale, their achievement is set against vast forces, glaciers covered continents, lowering seas and exposing land bridges, winds shaped plains, permafrost locked soils, and the tilt of Earth produced cycles of light and dark unknown in temperate zones. Against this backdrop, human life was almost invisible. A single campfire glowed faintly under stars while ice stretched for thousands of kilometers. Yet that campfire mattered. It showed that even in planetary extremes, human beings could carve out places to live. The distances involved magnify the story. To reach the high Arctic from central Eurasia required movement across thousands of kilometers over generations. Each step north demanded new adaptations, new knowledge, and new resilience. By the time groups reached Beringia, they had created systems capable of sustaining life indefinitely. The edge of Earth, once thought uninhabitable, became part of the human world. The Arctic was no longer a frontier, but a lived landscape, mapped in memory and marked by hearths and shelters. Food strategies revealed the sophistication behind endurance. Mammoth and reindeer were central, but smaller animals, fish, and birds added variety. Meat was stored in frozen ground, fat preserved for energy, hides treated for warmth. Nothing was wasted. Burned bone fragments show that fuel was drawn from every possible source. Such attention to detail made survival possible when error meant death. Endurance in the Arctic was not brute strength, but precise management of resources refined across generations. One unresolved question concerns the movement of ideas between Arctic groups and those farther south. Did technologies such as sewing needles or ivory carving spread outward from northern pioneers, or were they carried into the Arctic from elsewhere? The evidence is mixed. Some innovations appear earlier in the south, others appear first in the north. The flow of ideas may have been two-way, shaped by encounters along river valleys and steppe corridors. This uncertainty reminds us that endurance was not only physical, but cultural, involving exchange and adaptation across wide distances. Consider a moment in one of these camps. Snow lies deep outside, and the sun has not risen in weeks. Inside a shelter of bone and hide, a fire glows faintly. Children sleep wrapped in furs. Adults repair clothing, sharpen blades, and stir a pot of broth. Beads carved from ivory hang on a cord, glinting in firelight. Outside, the wind howls, but within the shelter, life continues. This scene, ordinary in its time, is extraordinary in ours. It shows endurance not as heroism, but as daily practice, repeated season after season. The fragility of their existence cannot be ignored. Populations were small, resources limited, and climates unstable. A single failed season could push a group to the edge. Yet over centuries, humans persisted in these conditions. Their success was not guaranteed, yet it was achieved, and that achievement shaped the course of history. By proving that the Arctic could be lived in, they opened routes that eventually carried people across Beringia and into the Americas. Endurance at the edge of Earth laid the foundation for one of humanity's greatest migrations. At the planetary level, this endurance highlights the adaptability of our species. From African savannas to Arctic tundra, humans transformed environments into homes. The Arctic, however, was the ultimate test. It required not only tools and strategies, but the ability to endure darkness, cold, and distance. That it was achieved at all speaks to the resilience built into human communities, the cooperation that bound them together, and the imagination that gave meaning to life even in harshest night. Step by step, the hunters, gatherers, and families of the high Arctic left their imprint. They carved beads, lit fires, and built shelters where few would have dared. Their camps, now buried in permafrost, are testimonies to persistence. The unanswered mysteries of their roots, their numbers, and their thoughts remain, but the fact of their endurance is certain. At the edge of Earth, humans lived, adapted, and prepared the way for journeys yet to come. The story of the Arctic's first humans does not end with certainty. Much remains unknown: the exact routes they traveled, the rhythms of their movements, the size of their groups, and the thoughts they carried through the dark winters. Yet what is clear is their presence. From the Yana River to the wide Beringian plain, they lit fires, sewed garments, and carved beads of ivory. In doing so, they left traces that endure across tens of thousands of years. These pioneers lived at the edge of what seemed possible. Their survival depended on tools of stone and bone, on shelters raised from mammoth remains, on fires that burned with fragments of fuel gathered from the land. Each detail shows a fragile existence, vulnerable to climate and chance, and yet, over centuries, they endured. They adapted not only their bodies, but their cultures, carrying symbols and ornaments into the frozen north. In their persistence lies the essence of humanity's reach. The Arctic was not conquered, it was learned, inhabited, and lived in. The people who ventured there wove their lives into the great cycles of ice and light, of animals and rivers. Their camps were small, but their achievement was vast. They proved that even at the margins of Earth, human life could take root. Today, glaciers have retreated, seas have risen, and much of Beringia lies drowned. But the echoes remain, preserved in permafrost, in stone tools buried deep, and in the genes of living people who carry traces of these ancient journeys. The first humans of the Arctic remind us of resilience, of the quiet endurance that carried our species into every corner of the world.